Let me ask you a question. When stress hits, whether it's an argument, a setback, or a sudden wave of anxiety, what's your immediate reaction? Most people try to fix it. They try to think their way out of it, argue with it, distract themselves from it. But what if I told you that the key to calming 80% of your stress is simply to do nothing for 90 seconds? Yes, just 90 seconds, not 10 minutes, not an hour of meditation, just a minute and a half. This idea is not pop psychology. It's based in neuroscience, and it leverages how the brain and body naturally respond to stress. This is what's called the 90-second rule, a concept backed by research showing that the physiological stress response only lasts about 90 seconds in the body. After that, you are the one keeping it alive. Through your thoughts, your stories, and your mental rumination, let's break it down. When we talk about stress, most people imagine it as this big, overwhelming force, something that just takes over your whole system and won't let go. But what most don't realize is that the biological stress response is actually incredibly short-lived, and that's where the real opportunity lies. See, when something triggers your stress response, maybe it's a sudden confrontation, a sharp tone in someone's voice, or even a thought that pops into your head unexpectedly. It kicks off a process in your nervous system. The amygdala, which is the brain's primary threat detection center, gets activated. It scans the environment, determines there's a potential danger, and signals the hypothalamus to release a cascade of hormones, mainly cortisol and adrenaline. That's the classic fight or flight reaction. Your pupils dilate, your heart starts racing. Blood is redirected away from your digestive system and toward your limbs to prepare you to run or fight. Your breathing becomes shallow and rapid. Your body shifts into survival mode. Now, here's the part most people don't know. That intense physiological wave, the sharp spike in stress hormones and nervous system activation, only lasts about 90 seconds. That's it. 1.5 minutes. That's the biological lifespan of an emotional trigger in your body, assuming you don't feed it. If you just let it happen, let it pass through you without judgment, without narrative, without trying to control it, that stress wave will peak and begin to decline in less than 2 minutes. It's a chemical event. It's like lighting a match. It flares up, burns for a brief moment, and then extinguishes. But here's the problem. Most of us don't allow that match to burn out. We throw fuel on it. We keep it alive, not with biology, but with psychology. We think about what happened. Replay the conversation. We imagine what we should have said or what they meant by what they said. We start predicting future consequences or reaching into the past to validate why this always happens to us. And in doing that, we restart the stress cycle. We extend it beyond the natural 90-second mark. This is where emotional suffering begins. Not from the initial trigger, but from the repeated activation of the stress response. We turn a 90-second chemical wave into a 90-minute spiral, or a 9-hour loop, or in some cases a 9-year pattern. And we don't even realize we're doing it, but this awareness changes everything. Once you understand that the body only needs 90 seconds to complete the acute stress response, you start to approach these moments differently. You stop trying to fight the emotion as soon as it arises. You stop reacting impulsively. And instead, you begin to observe. You say to yourself, okay, this is my body responding to a perceived threat. I don't need to identify with it. I don't need to act on it. I just need to breathe and let it move through. What you're doing in that moment is building a pause, an intentional gap between stimulus and response. And that gap is where you reclaim control, not by force, but by cooperation with your own biology. Now, from a neuroscience perspective, this is incredibly powerful because by giving yourself that 90-second window, by not acting, not spiraling, you allow the stress hormones to metabolize and the nervous system to self-regulate. The parasympathetic branch, which is responsible for rest and recovery, begins to kick back in. Your heart rate starts to come down. Your breathing stabilizes. Your vision, which narrows under stress, begins to open up again. This is when the prefrontal cortex, your executive function center, comes back online. That's the part of the brain responsible for rational thinking, perspective, and impulse control. But it doesn't function well when you're in fight or flight mode. The 90-second pause gives it time to re-engage. And once it does, you're no longer just reacting. You're responding with clarity and purpose. Let's take a real-world example. Imagine you're driving and someone cuts you off aggressively. Your body flares up, tight chest, clenched jaw, maybe a curse word or two. That's your stress response in motion. Now, you have two choices. You can lean into it. Speed up, tailgate them, rehearse a whole angry monologue in your head, or you can pause, you take a breath, maybe you even whisper to yourself, it's just 90 seconds. Let it pass. You don't accelerate. You don't feed the narrative. And slowly the chemicals clear. The urgency fades. You're back in control. This isn't about being passive or ignoring real issues. It's about understanding the difference between a reaction and a response. A reaction is impulsive. It's driven by the primitive brain. A response is thoughtful. It's driven by awareness. And awareness is a skill you can train. It starts with understanding your biology and then learning to work with it moment by moment. Now, here's something fascinating. Even elite performers, military personnel, high-level athletes, they all experience the same stress response. What sets them apart isn't that they don't feel it. It's that they've trained their systems to recognize it, pause, and recalibrate quickly. The 90-second rule applies to everyone. It's not about eliminating stress. It's about not being ruled by it. This principle is also crucial for emotional regulation in relationships. Think about how many arguments spiral out of control simply because both people are reacting from that initial stress spike. Voices raised, words get weaponized, and nobody's really hearing each other. But if just one person in the room practices the 90-second pause, it can shift the entire dynamic. Imagine being in a heated moment and saying nothing, just breathing, allowing that chemical surge to move through you without latching onto it. What happens next is remarkable. You create space. You signal safety, not just to yourself, but to the other person. And from that space, real communication can happen. Real resolution becomes possible. The key is catching the wave early. You want to notice the physical sensations, the tightness in your chest, the flush in your face, the acceleration of your thoughts. That's your signal. That's the match being lit. And once you catch it, you don't need to suppress it or judge it. You just need to ride it. Think of it like surfing. If you panic and fight the wave, you get tumbled. If you try to force it to stop, you drown. But if you accept it, stay on your board and breathe through it. It carries you to shore. That's exactly how emotions work. You don't outthink your biology. You work with it. You surf it. The more you practice this, the faster your nervous system adapts. It starts to trust that it doesn't need to overreact. You're training it to be resilient, responsive, not reactive. And over time, this creates a baseline of calm confidence in your life. Not because you don't feel things, but because you know how to feel them without being consumed by them. And this isn't just about big emotional triggers. It applies to micro stressors throughout the day. The email that frustrates you, the unexpected delay, the phone call you didn't want. Every one of these is a chance to practice. Every one of these is a 90-second opportunity to build emotional strength. Most people think transformation comes from massive effort, but true transformation often comes from these tiny decisions, the choice to pause, to breathe, to wait before reacting. That's the foundation of nervous system mastery. So next time you feel triggered, don't ask, how do I fix this? Ask, can I just give myself 90 seconds? That's all. 1.5 minutes of stillness, of presence, of letting your biology complete its cycle without interference. Because on the other side of that wave is clarity. On the other side is composure. On the other side is you, calm, grounded, and fully in control. Most people believe that emotions stick around because they're powerful or complicated. But the truth is they persist because we fuel them, and often we do it unconsciously. We've already talked about how the body's stress response, that flood of chemicals and neural activity, has a short biological lifespan, about 90 seconds. That's the hard science. But here's what happens next, and this part is just as important. Once that initial stress waves to fade, you're presented with a choice. One path allows the emotion to exit the system, almost like an X-whale. The other path reignites it. And the thing that reignites it is thought. The human brain has a remarkable ability. It can relive experiences over and over again through memory, through imagination, through language. And that's a gift, but it's also a liability. Because when something stressful happens, we don't usually let the experience move through and resolve. Instead, we attach a story to it. And this is where suffering begins. Let's say someone says something that catches you off guard, a comment that feels dismissive or disrespectful. Your nervous system reacts. There's that spike in adrenaline. Your heart rate ticks up. Your body's primed for action. That part, remember, is automatic. It's reflexive. But now comes the part you can influence. Your mind kicks in. You start thinking, why would they say that to me? Oh, they don't respect me. Or I always get treated this way. Or I should have said something back. And with every one of those thoughts, you are extending the lifespan of that emotion. You're no longer just responding to the trigger. You're reinforcing it. So instead of 90 seconds of activation, you've now turned it into 90 minutes or 90 minutes. Or in many cases, days, weeks, even years. Because we keep revisiting the same narrative loop. We rehearse pain. We replay the moment like a mental movie, adding new layers of meaning each time. And each repetition strengthens the neural circuits that associate that situation with threat. You're literally training your brain to respond faster and more intensely next time. And it will. This is how people develop chronic anxiety. This is how resentment builds. Not from the original moment, but from our repeated mental return to it. And here's the part that's critical to understand. Emotions don't persist because of biology. They persist because of identification. You begin to believe the thought. You become the thought, I am anxious. I am angry. But a victim, these aren't identities. They're temporary brain states. They're patterns of neural firing. And the more you believe they define you, the more power they have over your life. Now, this doesn't mean we suppress emotions. It doesn't mean we pretend we don't feel what we feel. Quite the opposite. We want to feel fully, but without becoming entangled in the narrative. And that's the skill. When the emotional wave comes, you allow it. You observe the sensations, the heat, the pressure, the tightness, but you don't add commentary. You don't turn it into a story. You stay with the raw data of the body and you let it pass, because the moment you start to mentally engage with the emotion, especially with judgment, especially with blame, you rewire your system for reactivity. We often think, if I can just figure out why I'm feeling this way, I'll feel better. But most of the time, that search for why is actually an avoidance of the what, the raw sensation, the embodied experience. And the body doesn't resolve stress through analysis. It resolves it through completion. This is why awareness is so powerful. The ability to witness your experience without becoming it. To know that you are having a thought, not being the thought. That's not just mindfulness, that's neuroscience in action. That's self-regulation at the neural level. And here's something subtle but important. The brain has what's called a default mode network. It's the part of the brain that activates when you're not focused on a specific task, when your mind is wandering, thinking about yourself, remembering the past, predicting the future. And that network is hyperactive in people who ruminate, in people who overthink, in people whose emotions linger long past their expiration date. So what does that mean practically? It means that every time you catch yourself spiraling in a story about something someone said, about how things should have gone, about what might happen, you have an opportunity to interrupt the pattern, not by suppressing the thorn, but by coming back to what's actually happening right now, which is usually not much. You're safe. You're breathing. Your heart is beating. Your body is alive. That's where reality lies, what in the imagined catastrophe, but in the current moment. And every time you return to this moment, you're strengthening your brain's ability to disengage from the default mode network and re-engage the task positive network, the part of your brain that anchors you in focus, in awareness in the now. That's what allows the emotional energy to dissipate. That's what keeps the stress response from reigniting again and again. Not solving the emotion, but not feeding it. And it's worth saying this isn't about avoiding difficult conversations or bypassing emotions that need to be processed. This is about giving your nervous system the space to operate cleanly, efficiently, without clutter. Because when your body has moved through the initial emotional wave and your mind hasn't reignited, what's left is clarity. You can still have the conversation. You can still take action. But it's coming from a grounded place, not a reactive one. The goal isn't to become emotionless. The goal is to let emotions move through without dragging your entire identity with them. There's a phrase in neuroscience, neurons that fire together, wire together. Every time you link a stressful thought to an emotion and repeat it again and again, you're creating a stronger bond between those two things. You're building a habit, but you can unbuild it. You can weaken the connection by not reinforcing it, by noticing the emotion, allowing it, but not engaging with the mental commentary. Over time, your brain learns something new, that emotional triggers don't have to become emotional patterns. And that's the shift from unconscious reactivity to conscious response, from identification with every thought to observation of thought as a passing event, from letting the mind prolong suffering to letting the body resolve emotion on its own terms. Now, the natural question is, how do you start doing this? The first step is awareness. You can't change what you don't notice. So begin by watching your own mental habits. When something triggers you, ask, am I fueling this with thought? Am I creating a story around this? Is this still the original stress, or is this the second wave I've created by engaging it mentally? You'll start to see the pattern clearly. And when you do, you'll realize you don't have to participate. The second step is breath. Nothing brings you back to the present like breath. It's the anchor that lives in your body. When your mind wants to spiral, drop attention into your breath. Feel it fully. It doesn't have to be deep or perfect, just present. And the third step is presence. What's actually happening right now, not in your mind, but in your environment? What do you see? What do you hear? What can you feel in your body? This brings you back into contact with reality, which is almost always more manageable than the narrative your brain is spinning. With practice, you'll find that even intense emotions begin to dissolve more quickly, not because they're less real, but because you're no longer sustaining them artificially. You're no longer building entire mental empires around a single moment of discomfort. You're letting biology do what it's designed to do, move through and move on. And that's where real power comes from. Not from control, but from cooperation, from alignment with the natural rhythm of your body and brain. Because when you stop feeding the emotion with thought, it stops feeding on you. There's something deeply powerful about learning to work with your physiology instead of against it. Because stress, at its core, isn't the enemy. In fact, stress is an adaptive response designed to protect you. The problem arises when we don't know how to complete the stress cycle. When we get stuck in the middle of it, activated, alert, and thing frozen there. That's when stress turns toxic. That's when the short burst becomes a lingering state. But the good news is the body already knows how to calm itself if we know how to activate the systems that do it. The autonomic nervous system controls our stress and relaxation responses. One branch, the sympathetic nervous system, activates during danger or perceived threat. It's the one that gets you ready to fight or flee. The other branch, the parasympathetic nervous system, is responsible for calming you down. It slows your heart rate, lowers blood pressure, relaxes your muscles, and brings you back into balance. Now, this 90-second rule we're exploring isn't just about knowing that your stress wave is short-lived. It's also about learning how to help your body move through it. And that's where tools like controlled breathing, visual anchoring, and body awareness come into play. Let's start with breathing. Breath is unique in the human body. It's both automatic and controllable. You don't have to think to breathe, but you can take control of your breath anytime you choose. That gives you direct access to your autonomic nervous system. In particular, certain types of breathing can send a powerful signal to your brain and body that you are safe, that the threat has passed, that it's time to shift from sympathetic to parasympathetic mode. One of the most effective methods is called physiological sighing. It's something we actually do naturally, especially after crying or under extreme emotional tension. It's a double inhale followed by a long exhale. It looks like this. You take a deep breath in through the nose, then a second shorter breath on top of that one, then a long, slow exhale through the mouth. What this does is reset the carbon dioxide and oxygen balance in your bloodstream, slows your heart rate, and activates the vagus nerve, a key player in the parasympathetic system. This isn't a theoretical benefit. You can feel the shift. Even a single round of that breath begins to down-regulate the stress response. And what's more powerful, it doesn't require a special location or any equipment or a long time. You can do it at your desk, in the car, in the middle of a conversation. You're simply using biology the way it was designed. Another key tool is visual anchoring. When we're stressed, our vision tends to narrow. It's called foveal focus. This is evolution's way of helping us lock in on a threat. The problem is narrow vision reinforces the feeling of danger. So the simple act of consciously widening your gaze, letting your eyes take in the periphery, the sides of the room, the ceiling, the floor, can actually the brain to begin calming down. Because your visual system is tightly linked to your state of arousal. Expanding your field of view lowers the activity in your amygdala and increases parasympathetic tone. Again, it sounds simple, but it's incredibly effective. When you're in that 90-second wave, that peak of activation, and you combine that moment with an intentional shift in breath and vision, you're actively signaling to your brain, we're okay. We can settle now. And your biology listens. When there's the somatic piece, body awareness. When people experience stress, they often try to mentally override it. I shouldn't feel this way. Just calm down. But the nervous system doesn't speak English. It speaks sensation. So if you want to work with your body, you have to communicate in its language. That's where grounding techniques come in. You shift attention to your feet on the floor. You press your palms together. You feel your body's contact with the chair or the earth. You scan for tension in your shoulders, your jaw, your stomach, and gently allow release. This isn't about distracting yourself. It's about reconnecting to the present moment through the physical body. Because here's what the science tells us. When you anchor your awareness and sensation rather than thought, you create a state shift. You're bringing the prefrontal cortex back online. You're decreasing activation in the limbic system. You're bringing yourself out of fight or flight and into a mode where you can think clearly, decide wisely, and act with intention. These tools aren't tricks. They're access points. They allow you to participate in your own regulation. And over time, as you practice them, your nervous system becomes more efficient. You don't stay in the stress state as long. The waves come and they pass. And most importantly, they don't take over your identity. This is why embodiment matters so much. You can't think your way out of stress that lives in your body. You have to feel your way through it, not with emotion alone, but with structured physiological tools. Breath. Visioning. When you integrate these into your life, even in small moments, you're teaching your brain a new baseline. You're saying, I can be activated without being overwhelmed. I can experience intensity without losing clarity. I can feel the full range of human emotion without getting stuck there. And it's worth emphasizing that this isn't about denying the experience. It's about completing the cycle. The stress response was never meant to be a permanent state. But in modern life, where most of our threats are psychological, emails, social dynamics, financial pressure, we don't get the physical movement or closure that our bodies expect after a threat. So these tools become even more essential. They simulate the completion signal. They help the nervous system register that spike we felt. We're safe again. And safety at the nervous system level thing, it's where everything allows us to access higher cognition, to connect authentically with others, to create, to sleep, to recover, to learn. Now imagine what happens when these tech aren't occasional, but part of your lifestyle. You walk into a meeting that would normally trigger your anxiety, but instead of getting caught in the thought loop, you take 2 physiological sighs, soften your gaze, and feel your feet on the ground, that 90-second wave still arrives, but it doesn't escalate. It doesn't spill over into your behavior. You stay composed, clear, and capable. Or you're in an argument with someone close to you, and instead of reacting, instead of lashing out or shutting down, you use your breath to hold space. You notice the rising tension in your body. You don't judge it, you meet it with presence. That simple act of self-regulation changes the entire dynamic of the interaction. Because one regulated nervous system can influence another, and calm is contagious. What you're doing in all of these moments is reclaiming the space between stimulus and response. That's where your power is. That's where your freedom lies. Not in avoiding stress, but in learning how to ride the wave with skill. And like anything, it gets better with practice. First few times you might forget, you'll react and then remember after. But over time, the pause gets shorter. The awareness gets sharper. The body starts to trust that it doesn't need to stay on high alert. This is what it means to build stress resilience, not to be unfeeling or stoic or detached, but to stay grounded in the face of activation, to experience emotion fully and still choose your response consciously. And this isn't just beneficial, it's transformative. Because once you experience the power of staying calm in a moment that would have unraveled you before, you begin to realize just how much of your life can be reclaimed. Stress will always be part of being human, but suffering, to a large extent, is optional. When you know how to access the off switch, when you know how to complete the wave, when you learn to use the tools wired into your own biology, then stress becomes manageable. Not because it's gone, but because you're no longer hostage to it. And it all begins with 90 seconds. Just a minute and a half where you choose to breathe instead of react, to observe instead of attach, to anchor instead of spiral. Over time, those 90-second choices become habits. Those habits become traits, and those traits shape the entire trajectory of your life. So the next time you feel the wave rising, remember, you don't have to stop it. You just have to ride it. Let the body do what it knows. Use the tools that are always with you. And when the wave passes, as it always does, you'll find yourself not just intact, but more powerful than before. Let's talk about what happens after the 90 seconds pass. Because the wave of the initial emotional or physiological stress response to rise and fall within that short window. But what happens is next just as important, maybe even more important than the wave itself. It's in those moments right after the surge that we make decisions. Decisions that either reinforce our activity or rewire our nervous system for greater control. This is the point at which a lot of people go unconscious. The stress wave hits, they feel it, and even though the initial trigger fades, maybe the person walks away, the comment is over, the body is still flooded with that residual energy. And if there's no intentional redirection, that energy spills over. We ruminate. We replay. We rehearse what we wish we had said, and in doing so, we keep the stress response alive far beyond its natural lifespan. But here's the opportunity: when you allow that to move through you and then consciously choose what happens next, you're rewiring your emotional memory. You're not just surviving the stress, you're retraining your brain to handle future stress more effectively. This is where behavioral redirection becomes essential, because after the storm, the nervous system is in a highly plastic state. The brain is still paying close attention, still trying to figure out, what do we do now? And that's when you have a critical window, just a few minutes, to send a new message. Let me explain why this works. During a high stress moment, the amygdala, which is the brain's emotional alarm system, becomes highly active. It scans for threat and creates associations between stimuli and responses. If every time you get stressed, you snap, withdraw, or ruminate, your brain wires that pattern more deeply. It learns. When I feel this way, this is what we do. But if you feel the wave, let it pass, and then respond differently, maybe with calm, movement, or constructive action. You're breaking that pattern. You're saying, just because I felt stress doesn't mean I have to be owned by it. And that subtle shift, it changes everything. This is neuroplasticity in real time. Your brain is constantly updating its internal map based on your behavior. Every choice you make, especially in heightened states, is teaching your brain what's normal, what's safe, what's effective. So what we do after those 90 seconds, one of the most powerful things you can do is move your body. Even just a few minutes of walking, stretching, or light physical activity sends a strong signal that the threat is over. It helps metabolize the stress hormones, especially cortisol and adrenaline that were released during the spike. It tells your muscles, your joints, your heart rate, we're not fighting or fleeing anymore. We're resolving. You might think of this like shaking off the residue of the stress response. In the animal kingdom, when prey animals escape a predator, they often tremble or shake afterward. That's their way of completing the stress cycle. Humans often suppress this instinct, but we need that physical discharge too. Without it, the energy lingers and our system stays in a low-grade state of activation. And it doesn't have to be elaborate. A brisk walk, a few minutes of shaking out your limbs, or even standing up and doing some gentle spinal twists. These actions ground your back in the present. They reclaim your physiology from the echo of the threat. The next tool is reflection, but not the kind where you overanalyze. This is structured reflection. You ask yourselves, what just happened? What did I feel? What story did I start telling myself? And most importantly, what do I want to do with this energy now? That last question is crucial because stress isn't just tension. It's potential. It's your body gearing up to take action. When you learn to redirect that energy into constructive behavior, you're turning a survival response into a growth stimulus. Let's say someone made a cutting remark and your whole system surged. The 90 seconds passed. You grounded yourself, breathed, widened your gaze. Now you've got energy in your system. What do you do with it? Maybe you channel it into movement. Maybe you sit and journal the experience. Maybe you take that intensity and focus it on a creative task or a challenge you've been putting off. This is more than emotional regulation. This is emotional alchemy. You're taking raw intensity and converting it into meaningful action. And the repetition of this practice builds a kind of internal strength, what we often refer to as resilience. But let's be clear, resilience isn't about not feeling. It's about feeling fully and then choosing your direction. It's about experiencing activation without collapsing into it. Over time, the gap between stimulus and response expands. And in that space, you gain access to your values, your vision, your most grounded self. Another piece here is language, how you narrate the experience to yourself, because the brain creates meaning from patterns. When you go through a stressful moment and follow it with calming action and healthy reflection, you begin to change the internal story. It's no longer, stress means I'm losing control. It becomes, stress is a signal I can work with. That shift alone removes so much fear from the experience of intensity because now it's not something to run from. It's something you can navigate. And there's an interesting paradox here. The more often you move through the 90-second wave and then choose constructive follow-up actions, the less stressed you'll become over time. Not because stress goes away, but because your system learns that it doesn't need to stay stuck. Your baseline level of activation lowers. Your recovery becomes faster, and your confidence in your ability to handle adversity increases dramatically. This creates a powerful feedback loop. You feel the stress, you ride the wave, you redirect the energy, and each time, your brain becomes more efficient at doing it again. It's like tuning an instrument. Every repetition brings you into better alignment. And this is where stress becomes a teacher, not a tormentor. When you realize that every activation is an opportunity to reinforce a more regulated identity, you stop fearing those moments. You start welcoming them as part of your training because life will always give us stressors. The world is unpredictable. People will say things. Plans will fall apart. Pressure will mount. But none of those things have the power to derail you unless you abandon your tools. So make this part of your pattern. Feel the wave. Let it rise. Let it crest. Let it fall. And then choose your next action with intention. Move your body. Reflect. Channel the energy. Use your breath. Use your awareness. Use your agency. And above all, repeat. Make it a ritual because the brain doesn't change with theory. It changes with consistent practice. You don't become calm by reading about calm. You become calm by practicing calm, especially right after the chaos. And in doing so, you teach every part of your system, from your heart rate to your hormones to your memory circuits, that you are not your stress. You are the one who moves through it. You are the one who comes out stronger on the other side. That's how you build real inner power, not by eliminating discomfort, but by expanding your capacity to meet it wisely, skillfully, and courageously, again and again.